An 80-year-old billionaire just signed over $4.7 billion to a waitress who served him soup, and his own son had no idea it was coming. She'd just been fired for breaking the one rule nobody breaks, speaking to Table 7. Clara Rivera had worked at Lovin for 8 months, Manhattan's most exclusive dining room where tables cost $5,000 minimum and silence is enforced like law. She'd served senators, billionaires, celebrities who paid fortunes for discretion. Tonight, walking out through the kitchen door with her termination letter, she knew something was terribly wrong. The woman at Table 7 hadn't ordered food. She'd whispered 2 words that changed everything. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. 6 hours earlier, Clara's phone had buzzed during her break. A hospital bill, $47,000 for her mother's treatment in Columbus, Ohio. Insurance denied. Again, she'd been working double shifts at Lovin for 8 months, sleeping 4 hours a night, sending every dollar home. Her mother's cancer treatments were draining everything. The other servers didn't know. Clara kept her head down, followed every rule, never complained. At $5,000 per table, she'd calculated she needed 9 more months of perfect service to clear the debt. But in 90 seconds, she'd speak 3 words that would change everything. The dinner rush was starting. Table 7 had just been seated, and the woman sitting there was staring directly at Clara. Henry, the maitre d', gathered the evening staff with his usual precision. Table 7 was Lorenzo Blackwood, worth $4.7 billion. He hadn't spoken a complete sentence to anyone except his assistant Beatrice in 15 years. Every Tuesday night, his son Adrian sat across from him at Table 7. They ate in total silence. No conversation. No eye contact, just the quiet precision of silverware against porcelain. The staff called it the funeral dinner. Servers rotated weekly because nobody could handle the tension more than once. Tonight was Clara's turn. Henry's instructions were simple: approach from the left, never make eye contact, place dishes without a sound, disappear immediately. What they don't know is that tonight, someone's about to break the silence. Clara approached Table 7 carrying the first course. Lorenzo Blackwood sat motionless, 80 years old, silver-haired, his posture rigid as steel. Across from him, his son Adrian, 32, wore a $15,000 suit and scrolled his phone with mechanical precision. The tension between them was thick enough to cut. Clara had served hundreds of wealthy families. She recognized the choreography of resentment, but as she placed Lorenzo's plate, something caught her attention. His hand trembled, slightly reaching for water, just a fraction. Nobody else noticed, and then she saw his eyes, not the cold, detached gaze everyone described, something else entirely: desperation. She sees something in his eyes that everyone else has missed for 15 years, and it's about to cost her everything. Lorenzo's dish arrived, saffron risotto prepared by a Michelin-starred chef flown in from Milan. He stared at it, didn't touch it. Across the table, Adrian muttered something about wasting time, his voice barely audible. Clara's supervisor hissed at her from across the room to refill water glasses. She approached Table 7 silently, pitcher in hand, eyes down. The restaurant hummed with muted conversations, the clink of crystal, the whisper of wealth, and then she heard it. Lorenzo whispered something. One word spoken to no one, his eyes fixed on the risotto. Mama! Italian, the word hung in the air. That single word, spoken to no one, is about to unlock a secret that's been buried for 55 years. Clara froze. Before we go further into what happens next, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Clara froze. Her grandmother was from Tuscany. She'd grown up hearing Italian in the kitchen, the language of Sunday dinners and old stories. She knew that word. She knew that tone. It wasn't about the risotto. It was about memory. Without thinking, breaking every rule Lovin enforced, she leaned in and whispered in Italian. La maestra della nonna è grave meglio, vero? Grandma's soup is better, isn't it? Lorenzo's head snapped up. For the first time in 15 years, his eyes focused on another human being, not through them, at her. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Adrian's phone stopped mid-scroll. Henry, across the room, went rigid. Clara had just committed career suicide. What happens in the next 8 seconds will get her fired, blacklisted, and offered a job that pays $150,000 a year. Lorenzo Blackwood smiled. Then he spoke. Lorenzo's hand shot out. He grabbed Clara's wrist, not aggressive, desperate. His grip was surprisingly strong for a man his age, trembling but firm. He whispered back in Italian, his voice cracking, "You know." 2 words that carried the weight of decades. Adrian's fork clattered against his plate. The sound echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. Heads turned, conversations stopped. Henry appeared from nowhere, his face red, voice tight with controlled panic. "Ms. Rivera, step away from the table immediately." Clara tried to pull back, but Lorenzo wouldn't let go. His other hand fumbled in his jacket pocket, shaking, searching for something. Adrian stood up. "Father, what are you doing?" Security moved toward the table. Diners whispered. "The entire restaurant is watching." Security is moving in, and Lorenzo is pulling out a piece of paper that hasn't seen daylight in decades. It was yellowed, folded into a small square, the creases worn soft from years of being carried. He pressed it into Clara's palm beneath the table, his eyes locked on hers. Then he whispered one more thing in Italian. A name. Lorenzo pressed the folded paper into Clara's palm. His fingers closed hers around it, holding tight for just a moment. Then he looked directly into her eyes and spoke in clear English, the first full sentence anyone had heard from him in years. "Call this number. Say Beatrice sent you." Henry physically pulled Clara away, his grip professional but firm. "You're done. Get your things and leave." Adrian was standing now, phone already out, making calls. His voice was sharp, clipped. "I want her banned from every restaurant in Manhattan tonight." Other diners stared, some filmed on their phones. Clara stumbled backward, the paper burning in her closed fist. Lorenzo sat back down, his face suddenly peaceful, as if an enormous weight had been lifted. Adrian leaned across the table, hissing something Clara couldn't hear. Security escorted her toward the kitchen. She has no idea that the number on that paper belongs to the second most powerful person in New York, someone who's been waiting for this call for 55 years. In the locker room, hands shaking, Clara unfolded the paper. 7 digits, handwritten in faded ink, and beneath it 2 words, Maria Conti. In the kitchen, Henry's voice was ice. "You're fired, effective immediately." Clara stood frozen, still holding the paper. "You touched a guest, you broke protocol, you violated the most fundamental rule of this establishment." Other staff members avoided her eyes. Henry continued, his words deliberate, final. "You're blacklisted from every establishment in Manhattan. I'm making calls tonight. You'll never work fine dining again." Clara's hands shook as she gathered her things from her locker. 8 months of perfect service. Gone, $47,000 in debt. No job, no references. In the staff bathroom, she unfolded the paper under fluorescent lights. A phone number, 7 digits in faded ink, and beneath it 1 word, Beatrice. That name is about to open a door to the most exclusive inner circle in American business, and Clara has no idea she's already been inside it her entire life. 2 a.m. Clara sat in her studio apartment in Queens, staring at the number. Clara sat on her bed in her studio apartment in Queens. Hospital bills spread across the comforter like accusations. $47,000. She had $340 in her bank account. Rent was due in 6 days. She stared at the paper for 2 hours, turning it over in her hands. The handwriting was old, careful. The ink had faded to brown. At 2:47 a.m., she dialed the number. Her hands shook. It rang once. A woman's voice answered, sharp as a scalpel, wide awake despite the hour. "You spoke Italian to him." Not a question, a statement. Clara's breath caught. Yes, who is this? What did he say to you?" The voice was measured, controlled, but Clara detected something underneath. Urgency. "He said, Mama." He was looking at risotto. Silence on the line, then. "And you responded." "I asked if his grandmother's soup was better." The woman on the other end knows Clara's full name, her mother's diagnosis, her exact bank balance, and she's about to make an offer that sounds too good to be legal. "Clara Rivera, 23, mother in Columbus undergoing chemotherapy, fired tonight from Lovin. I need you in my office in 4 hours. My name is Beatrice Vance. I manage Mr. Blackwood's personal affairs." The voice carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed. 70 years old, former federal prosecutor, now the gatekeeper to a $4.7 billion empire. "Mr. Blackwood wants to hire you, $150,000 annual salary, full medical benefits for you and your mother effective immediately. You'll be his companion, you'll cook for him, you'll speak Italian with him." Clara's mind reeled. This is a scam. It's not. Nobody offers that kind of money for. You broke 15 years of silence with 3 words. You reminded him of something he thought was dead. That's worth considerably more than $150,000. Clara stood up, pacing her tiny apartment. "I don't understand." "You don't need to, not yet, but I need an answer in 4 hours." "Why?" "Because his son Adrian is currently calling every contact he has to ensure you never work again, and because—" Beatrice paused. Clara thinks it's a scam, but then Beatrice says 6 words that prove she's not. "We own your mother's insurance company." Silence. "The $47,000 claim that was denied, approved, effective tonight. Consider it a signing bonus." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "This is blackmail." Beatrice's response was immediate, clinical. "This is business. Blackwood Holdings owns Medcare Insurance through a subsidiary called Venture Health Solutions. Your mother's claims have been denied 14 times in the past 8 months. I reviewed every single one this evening. They're all legitimate. The denials are bureaucratic nonsense." Clara felt sick. "So you're holding my mother's life hostage?" I'm offering you employment with extraordinary benefits. What you choose to do with that offer is entirely up to you. And if I say no, then nothing changes. Your mother's claims remain denied. You remain blacklisted. You find another job, probably retail, maybe food service. You send what little you can afford back to Columbus. And Lorenzo Blackwood continues eating in silence until he dies. The cruelty was delivered without emotion, like reading a weather report. You have 24 hours to decide. My office is at 780 Park Avenue, 32nd floor, 7 a.m. tomorrow. The line went dead. But Clara doesn't know that across town, Lorenzo's son Adrian is already digging into her past, and what he finds is about to make him panic. 3 a.m. Adrian Blackwood sat in his corner office at Blackwood Technologies, his head of security across the desk. Marcus had been former FBI, the kind of man who found things people wanted buried. File folders spread across the polished mahogany. Clara Rivera, born Columbus, Ohio, 23 years old. Father died when she was 7, construction accident, no insurance payout. Mother Maria, stage 3 breast cancer, prognosis unclear. Student loans $89,000 from 2 years at Columbus State before she dropped out. Eviction notice from 2 years ago. Works 3 jobs before lovin', always sending money home. Marcus slid another document forward. Bank records show she's been barely surviving. No criminal record. No history of scams or cons. Adrian shook his head. She's a con artist. She had to be. She targeted him. How? She was assigned that table by rotation. Then she got lucky and she's exploiting it. Adrian is about to make a move that he thinks will end this, but instead it's going to prove exactly what kind of person Clara really is. He picked up his phone. Get me our contacts at every major bank in the city. I want her accounts frozen for fraud investigation. 7 a.m. Clara sat in a diner in Queens, staring at cold coffee she couldn't afford. A man in a $10,000 suit slid into the booth across from her. Adrian Blackwood, no introduction. He placed a check on the table between them and pushed it forward with 2 fingers, $50,000. Take this, disappear, forget you ever met my father. Clara stared at the check. The numbers seemed unreal. I don't understand. Adrian leaned in, his voice low, controlled. You spoke Italian to a lonely old man, very clever, probably researched him, found out about his background, his mother. I'll admit it was well executed. That's not what happened. I know what you are, you're desperate. You saw an opportunity, I don't blame you for trying, but this ends now. Clara's hands trembled. Your father asked me to call someone. My father hasn't made a coherent decision in 15 years. He's confused, elderly. You took advantage. I didn't. $50,000. Cash it today, leave New York, don't contact him again, don't contact Beatrice. What Clara does in the next 15 seconds will make Adrian realize he's made a catastrophic miscalculation. Clara picked up the check. Her fingers traced the numbers. $50,000. It would save her mother, cover 6 months of treatment, pay off half her student loans, give her breathing room she hadn't had in years. She thought about it. 10 seconds that felt like 10 minutes. Her mother's face, the hospital bills, the eviction notice 2 years ago. The nights she'd gone hungry so she could send more money home. Adrian watched her, confident. He'd seen this play out before. Everyone had a price. Then Clara tore the check in half, then quarters, then eighths. The pieces fell from her fingers onto the table like snow. I don't want your money. I wanted to help your father. Adrian's face went still. You're making a mistake. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. She stood up. Adrian watches the pieces flutter down and realizes something terrifying. She can't be bought, which means his father chose her for a reason Adrian doesn't understand yet. You'll regret this. Clara walked out without looking back. Outside the diner, Clara pulled out the folded paper, the number, her hand still shaking from adrenaline. She dialed. Beatrice answered on the first ring. I accept the job, Beatrice paused. The insurance approval. Not because of that, because your boss looked at me like he was drowning and I was air. Silence on the line. 3 seconds that stretched. Then Beatrice's voice, different somehow, softer. Come to the Blackwood estate tomorrow at 6 a.m. The address is 1847 Riverside Drive. Bring nothing. We'll provide everything you need. What exactly will I be doing? You'll understand when you arrive. The call ended. Clara stood on the sidewalk, phone in hand, realizing she had no idea what she'd just agreed to. She's about to enter a world where silence is currency and secrets are inherited, and she's carrying one secret that even she doesn't know about yet. That night, she packed a single bag. The next morning, she took the train north. The Blackwood estate rose from the Hudson like a fortress. The Blackwood estate rose from the banks of the Hudson River like something out of another century. 47 acres of manicured grounds, stone walls, history. Beatrice escorted Clara through hallways lined with portraits of men who'd built empires. Lorenzo's private wing was quieter, simpler. He sat in a leather chair by a window overlooking the river. He hadn't moved in hours. He hasn't eaten in 2 days, Beatrice whispered. Won't speak. The doctors say there's nothing physically wrong. Clara approached slowly. Lorenzo stared at the water, motionless. She knelt beside his chair. Spoke softly in Italian. Cosa ti fece va tua madre quando eri triste? What did your mother make you when you were sad? Lorenzo's silence finally breaks, and the reason he stopped speaking 15 years ago is more devastating than anyone imagined. Lorenzo's head turned slowly. His eyes met hers, then he spoke. In Italian. The words came haltingly at first, rusty from disuse. Minestrone, con pane fatto in casa. Minestrone, with homemade bread. Then he switched to English, his voice cracking. 15 years ago, my wife Sophia died. Pancreatic cancer, fast, brutal. We had 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. His hands trembled on the armrests. Her last words were in Italian, the language of her childhood, our courtship, our private moments. I couldn't bear to hear it again. It was everywhere, restaurants, streets, television, so I stopped speaking, stopped engaging, stopped hearing. Tears ran down his face. Until you. The door opened. Adrian stood frozen in the doorway. His father, who never cried at Sophia's funeral, who built a steel empire on ruthlessness, who taught Adrian that emotion was weakness, was weeping in front of a stranger. Lorenzo reached for Clara's hand. She used to say that silence was the cruelest inheritance, that I was teaching Adrian to bury everything that mattered. But the real earthquake is about to hit when Lorenzo asks Clara a question that will unravel everything. Tell me about your grandfather. Clara sat back, surprised by the question. My nonno Pietro, he died when I was 8. I barely remember him. Tell me what you do remember. He was a carpenter, built furniture, beautiful pieces, tables, chairs, cabinets. He had a workshop in the garage. I used to sit and watch him work. Lorenzo leaned forward. Where was he from? Italy, came to America in 1968. He never talked much about the old country. My grandmother said he wanted to forget. What was his full name? Clara hesitated. Something in Lorenzo's intensity made her nervous. Pietro Conti, from Lucca. Lorenzo went pale. The color drained from his face, so quickly Beatrice stepped forward in alarm. From Lucca, his voice was barely a whisper. Yes, why, how did you? Lorenzo stood up for the first time in days. His legs were unsteady, but his voice was clear. Beatrice, get the box. Beatrice didn't move. Lorenzo, are you certain? Now. There's a box in Lorenzo's safe that hasn't been opened in 55 years, and what's inside is about to rewrite the entire Blackwood fortune's origin story. Beatrice left the room. The silence stretched. Adrian stood in the doorway, watching his father with an expression Clara couldn't read. Minutes later, Beatrice returned carrying a locked metal box, old and weathered. Lorenzo took it with trembling hands. He reached inside his shirt and pulled out a key on a thin chain around his neck. The lock clicked open. Inside, a faded manila envelope, a black and white photograph with curled edges, and a receipt on yellowed paper. Lorenzo lifted the receipt carefully, as if it might disintegrate. He handed it to Clara. The ink was faded but legible. March 14, 1970. $500 loan to be repaid with gratitude. P. Conti to L. Blackwood. Clara's breath stopped. The photograph showed 2 young men in work clothes, covered in sawdust and grime, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. One was unmistakably a young Lorenz, dark-haired, lean, his face unlined. The other man had her grandfather's eyes. That $500, loaned by a poor Italian carpenter to an immigrant steelworker, became the seed money for a $4.7 billion empire. And Lorenzo has been searching for Pietro Conti for 55 years to repay it. Lorenzo's voice was thick with emotion. 1970. I was 25 years old, working 16-hour shifts in a Pittsburgh steel mill, barely surviving, but I had an idea, a better welding technique that could revolutionize structural steel construction. He touched the photograph gently. I needed $500 to file a patent and buy materials to build a prototype. Every bank rejected me. I was nobody, an immigrant with an accent and dirty fingernails. Clara stared at the receipt. Pietro gave him $500. In 1970, that was 3 months' wages for a carpenter, Lorenzo finished. He had a wife, a newborn daughter, your mother, and he gave me everything he'd saved. Why? I asked him that. He said, because nobody gave me a chance when I arrived. Someone has to be first. No contract, no lawyer, just a handshake in a church parking lot. Lorenzo's hands shook. The patent was approved. The technique worked. Within 5 years, I had contracts with every major construction company on the East Coast. He never asked for the money back. I searched for him for years, hired investigators, nothing. Beatrice has been searching too, that's her real job, and she's about to reveal just how far the Blackwood family has gone to find Pietro Conti's family. Beatrice stepped forward, her face unreadable. I need to tell you something, Clara. Her voice was different now, careful. I've been tracking Pietro Conti's family for 30 years. It's been my primary assignment since Lorenzo hired me in 1995. Clara felt cold. What do you mean, tracking? Pietro died in 1999. We found that out in 2000, but he had a daughter, Maria, your mother. We located her 6 years ago in Columbus. The room tilted. You've been watching my mother. We arranged for her to receive the Medcare insurance through a subsidiary. The coverage was real. The denials, Beatrice paused. The denials were a test. A test, Clara's voice rose. My mother has cancer. To see how you handled adversity, to see what kind of person you were. We've been watching you your entire adult life, every job, every decision, every time you sent money home instead of paying your own rent, every time you had a choice between yourself and someone else. Clara realizes with horror that her entire life has been a test, but she's about to learn the test results and they're not what she thinks. Clara stood abruptly, the chair scraping against hardwood. You manipulated my mother's cancer treatment to test me. Her voice shook with fury. That's not testing, that's evil. Lorenzo didn't flinch. He nodded slowly. Yes, it is. I am not a good man, Clara. I have never pretended to be. I am a ruthless man who built an empire on calculated risks and strategic cruelty. But your grandfather was good, genuinely, selflessly good. And you? He coughed violently, his whole body convulsing. Beatrice moved to help, but Lorenzo waved her off with an impatient hand. And you are like him. Every decision you've made proves it. We denied 14 legitimate insurance claims, and you never sued, never complained publicly, never tried to manipulate or threaten. You just kept working. Kept sending money, kept trying. Clara's hands were fists. That doesn't make what you did right. No, it doesn't, but it makes you the right person. Lorenzo looked at Beatrice. Tell her the rest. The rest is an inheritance structure so complex and so shocking that Adrian, listening from the hallway, is about to have a complete meltdown. Beatrice pulled a leather folder from her briefcase. Her movements were precise, practiced. Lorenzo's current will leaves 51% voting control of Blackwood Holdings to Adrian. The company is worth $4.7 billion. Adrian would become chairman and CEO. Clara glanced at the doorway where Adrian had been standing. He was gone. But Lorenzo wants to change the will. He's establishing the Pietro Blackwood Trust, named in honor of your grandfather. The trust will hold 51% of all voting shares in Blackwood Holdings. I don't understand. The trust won't own the shares outright, it will control them. The trustees will vote those shares at every board meeting, make every major strategic decision, approve or deny every merger, acquisition, and executive appointment. Beatrice's eyes locked on Clara's. The trustees will be two people, you and me. You'll control the company, not own it, control it, to ensure it's run with integrity, not just profit. Clara felt dizzy. I'm 23 years old. I don't know anything about running a corporation. That's why I'll be co-trustee, but you have final say on all ethical questions. Adrian bursts through the door in 10 seconds, and the confrontation that follows will determine whether this family destroys itself or heals. The door slammed open. Adrian stood in the doorway, his face white with rage, phone still in his hand. He'd been listening. You're giving MY Company to a waitress? His voice cracked on the last word. Lorenzo didn't stand. Didn't raise his voice. It's not your company, you didn't build it. Pietro Conti and I did with $500 and a handshake. I've worked for that company for 10 years. You've managed it competently, but you didn't build it from nothing. You didn't sacrifice. You didn't risk. Adrian stepped into the room. And she did. She served risotto for 8 months. She sacrificed everything for someone she loves. You've never done that. Because you taught me not to. The words exploded out. You taught me that sentiment was weakness, that family was obligation, that love was liability. Lorenzo's face crumpled. I know I was wrong. You think I'm like you, ruthless, heartless. Maybe I am, but at least I earned it. You earned nothing. You inherited everything, including my mistakes. The real reason Adrian hates Clara has nothing to do with money. It's because she represents everything he wishes his father had been. Clara stepped between them. Not dramatically, just moved into the space, forcing both men to look at her instead of each other. Her voice was quiet but firm. I don't want your company. I don't want control of anything. I didn't come here for money or power. I came here because an old man looked at me like he was drowning and I was air. She turned to Lorenzo. I want my grandfather's debt repaid, and then I want to go home to take care of my mother. Lorenzo shook his head slowly. The debt cannot be repaid in dollars, Clara. $500 in 1970 became $4.7 billion. There is no mathematical equation that settles that account. Then what do you want from me? The debt can only be honored by ensuring that this company built on your grandfather's kindness is run with his values, by making sure that the empire created by one act of generosity continues to create opportunities for people like we were, poor, desperate, invisible. Adrian laughed bitterly. You want to turn Blackwood Holdings into a charity? I want to turn it into what it should have been. But there's one final secret about Pietro Conti that even Lorenzo doesn't know, and when Clara reveals it, the entire room will go silent. Clara reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out her phone. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. She scrolled through photos, found one, turned the screen toward Lorenzo. The photograph showed a hospital room. A very old man in bed, thin and gray, oxygen tubes in his nose. Beside him, a girl of 12 with dark braids held his hand. Clara. This was taken in 2015, 3 days before my grandfather died. I was 12. My mother made me sit with him because she knew the end was close. Lorenzo stared at the image. He talked a lot that day about Italy, about coming to America, about furniture and work and family. Clara's voice was steady. And he talked about you. About a young man in Pittsburgh who had a dream. What did he say? He said, "Tell Lorenzo I forgave the debt in 1972. He paid me back 100 times by giving jobs to Italian immigrants. By building something that mattered, tell him I'm proud of him." The debt was forgiven 53 years ago, which means everything Lorenzo has built on guilt has been built on a foundation that didn't exist. Lorenzo collapsed into his chair. Beatrice moved quickly to catch him, steadying his shoulders. He was crying again, harder this time, not quiet tears, deep, wrenching sobs that shook his whole body. "I've spent 55 years trying to repay a debt that was already forgiven." His voice broke on the last word. "I built an empire on guilt, on obligation, on the weight of knowing I could never repay what was given." He looked around the room, at the luxury, the paintings, the monuments to success. "I sacrificed my marriage, my relationship with my son, my happiness, all to honor a debt that didn't exist." Clara knelt beside his chair. "He didn't want repayment, Mr. Blackwood. He wanted you to be happy. Were you happy?" Lorenzo looked at Adrian standing rigid in the doorway, at Beatrice who'd spent 30 years executing his guilt, at the empire he'd built from $500 and a lifetime of penance. "No." The word was barely a whisper. "This is the moment that will decide everything, because Lorenzo is about to make a choice that nobody in the room sees coming." The silence stretched for 5 full seconds. Then Lorenzo straightened in his chair. Lorenzo stood. His legs were still unsteady, but his voice was clear. He walked slowly to Adrian, who tensed as his father approached. "Your mother would be ashamed of what I taught you. Before she died, Sophia told me I was raising you to be successful instead of good. She was right." Lorenzo's hand reached out, touched Adrian's shoulder. "I taught you that money is power, that ruthlessness is strength, that sentiment is weakness, but Pietro taught me something different 55 years ago. He taught me that kindness is power, that generosity creates more value than hoarding, and I forgot. I spent 5 decades building an empire and forgetting the lesson." He turned back to Clara. "I'm not changing my will. The trust stays with Adrian. He'll control the company. But I'm hiring you for a different job, a more important one. The job Lorenzo offers Clara will require her to stay with the Blackwood family for 5 years, and what he asks her to teach Adrian will change the future of American business. I want you to teach my son what your grandfather taught me, not business, not strategy, how to be a man who builds things without destroying people in the process." Lorenzo returned to his chair, suddenly looking his 80 years. "Your salary will be $200,000 annually. You'll live here. Your mother's medical care will be fully covered, no more denials, no more bills, everything she needs for as long as she needs it. But that's not your real payment." Clara waited. "When you leave in 5 years, I'll endow a $50 million scholarship fund in your grandfather's name. The Pietro Conti Foundation, for immigrants, for builders, for people with ideas and no capital. People like Pietro was, like I was." He looked at the photograph still displayed on Clara's phone. People who give $500 when they can't afford it because someone has to be first. Clara's connection to the Blackwood Empire wasn't an accident. Her grandfather planted a seed in 1970 that's been growing in the dark for 55 years, and it's finally breaking into the light. 3 months later, Clara had moved into a guest suite in the east wing of the Blackwood estate. Every evening at 6, she cooked dinner in Lorenzo's private kitchen. Simple Italian food. The dishes her grandmother taught her that her grandfather loved, minestrone, osso buco. Risotto made the way Nane made it, not the way Michelin chefs did. Lorenzo ate everything, started gaining weight, started smiling. Adrian joined them for dinner twice a week at first, reluctantly, sitting in silence while his father and Clara spoke Italian, but slowly something shifted. Clara told stories about Pietro, about a man who built furniture with his hands and raised a daughter alone after his wife died young, about sacrifice that didn't announce itself, about quiet strength. Adrian listened, asked questions, started learning Italian phrases. The dinners at table 7 resumed not at Lovin but here in the estate's formal dining room, but now with conversation, laughter, arguments about politics and philosophy. Lorenzo spoke Italian again without pain. The language of love instead of loss. Beatrice joined them sometimes, her severe face softening. But the final payment of the debt happens at a press conference that shocks Wall Street, because Lorenzo is about to announce something that no billionaire in history has ever done. The press conference took place on a Tuesday morning in Manhattan. Financial reporters packed the room, cameras lined the back wall. Lorenzo Blackwood walked to the podium, speaking publicly for the first time in 15 years. His voice was steady, clear. In 1970, a carpenter named Pietro Conti loaned me $500, no contract, no collateral, just faith in a stranger. That loan became Blackwood Holdings, worth $4.7 billion today. He paused, looking directly at the cameras. I'm announcing the creation of the Pietro Conti Accountability Trust. 20% of Blackwood Holdings' voting shares will be held in perpetual trust, not by my family, not by executives. By trustees selected from immigrant communities rotating every 10 years, they will have veto power over any decision that prioritizes profit over people. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. This company was built on a $500 loan from a poor carpenter. It will be governed with his values forever: kindness, generosity, the belief that someone has to be first. Wall Street analysts call it financial suicide. But 6 months later, Blackwood Holdings stock will reach an all-time high because investors finally trust the company has a conscience. The estate kitchen smelled like basil and garlic. Clara stood at the stove, stirring a pot of minestrone. Lorenzo sat at the kitchen table, chopping vegetables with careful precision. His hands didn't shake anymore. "More salt?" Clara asked in Italian. "Un po'," he replied. "A little." The door opened. Adrian walked in, still wearing his suit from the office but loosening his tie. "Can I help?" Lorenzo looked up. For a moment, Clara saw the old tension flicker across his face. Then it passed. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a wooden spoon, old and worn smooth from decades of use. "Your great-grandfather Pietro made this. He gave it to me in 1970. Lorenzo handed it to Adrian. "Now you stir." The greatest fortunes aren't measured in billions. They're measured in kindness that compounds across generations. And the Blackwood family has finally learned to calculate wealth the way Pietro Conti did. Lorenzo Blackwood passed away peacefully in 2024, surrounded by family. He was 83. Clara Rivera serves as executive director of the Pietro Conti Foundation, which has provided $847 million in immigrant business loans. Over 12,000 businesses have been funded. Adrian Blackwood restructured Blackwood Holdings with a worker profit-sharing model, increasing employee wages by 340%. The company is now ranked the #1 employer in America for workplace satisfaction. Maria Rivera's cancer went into full remission. She lives in a home purchased by her daughter in Columbus. She still makes minestrone every Sunday. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness, a $500 loan, 3 words in Italian, a bowl of soup, become the foundation of empires built not on steel, but on soul.